It was a bright, sunny Saturday morning in Maple Grove. This was a small, quiet neighborhood where everybody seemed to know everybody, or at least that's what people thought. The houses sat in neat rows with green lawns and pretty flowers. Kids rode bikes down the street and old folks waved from their porches. It was the kind of place where nothing big ever happened, or so it seemed. In the middle of all this calm sat Jake Miller. Jake was a guy who didn't talk much. He lived in a little house with a driveway where he kept his old pickup truck. That truck was his pride and joy. It was big, with rusty spots and a loud engine that growled like a bear when he turned it on. On this sunny morning, Jake was out there messing with the truck. He had a greasy rag in one hand and a wrench in the other. The engine roared a little, sending puffs of smoke into the air. It wasn't super loud, just loud enough to make you notice. Most people in Maple Grove didn't care. They smile and wave at Jake as they walked by. "Good old Jake and his truck," they'd say. But not everyone felt that way. Oh no, there was one person who couldn't stand Jake or his truck. Her name was Linda Harper, and she was the boss of the HOA. HOA stands for Homeowners Association. It's a group that makes rules for the neighborhood, like no loud noises or messy yards. Linda took her job very seriously. She was tall and thin, with sharp eyes that could spot a weed from a mile away. She always carried a clipboard scribbling notes about who was breaking her rules. And when she walked, she didn't just walk, she strutted. Her shoes clicked on the pavement like she was the queen of Maple Grove. To her, this neighborhood was hers to control. Linda had a glare that could scare anyone. It was so strong it felt like it could melt steel. And when she looked at Jake, that glare was on full blast. She didn't like him one bit. To her, he was just that noisy kid. She didn't care that Jake was a grown-up, not a kid. She didn't care that he kept to himself and never bothered anyone. All she saw was his loud truck and his greasy hands. "He doesn't belong here," she'd mutter under her breath. She'd stand by her perfect white fence, arms crossed, staring at Jake like he was a bug she wanted to squash. That Saturday morning, Jake was doing what he always did. He popped the hood of his truck and started fixing something. The engine growled a little louder than usual. A puff of gray smoke floated up into the blue sky. Jake wiped his hands on his rag and grinned. He loved that truck. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. He didn't care what anyone thought. Well, almost anyone. Linda was watching from across the street. She stood on her porch, her clipboard tight in her hands. Her lips were pressed into a thin, angry line. She didn't like the noise, she didn't like the smoke, and she really didn't like Jake. That boy, a problem, she said to herself. She tapped her pen on her clipboard, already writing down complaints in her head. To her, Jake was breaking every rule in her book. She thought he was just some lazy guy who didn't fit in with her perfect neighborhood. But here's the thing. Jake wasn't who Linda thought he was, not even close. She saw a noisy guy with a beat-up truck. She saw someone she could boss around, but Jake had a secret, a big one. It was hiding right there under his greasy baseball cap. He wasn't just some random guy fixing a truck. There was more to him, way more. Linda didn't know it yet, but Jake was about to turn her whole world upside down. What was he hiding? Why wasn't he scared of Linda's mean looks and loud threats? You'll find out soon, but let's keep going. See, Jake wasn't loud or rude like Linda thought. He was quiet. He didn't talk much to the neighbors. He'd just nod or wave when they said hi. Some people thought he was shy, others thought he was weird. "Why's he always out there with that truck?" they'd whisper. "What's he up to?" But Jake didn't mind the whispers. He had his reasons for being there, and they weren't what anyone expected. The neighborhood wasn't big. There were maybe 20 houses, all lined up nice and tidy. Maple Grove had tall trees that made shade on hot days. Birds chirped in the branches and squirrels ran across the grass. It was peaceful until Linda started yelling, that is. She loved her rules more than anything. If your grass was too long, she'd knock on your door. If your dog barked too much, she'd leave a note. And if you dared to make noise like Jake's truck, she'd lose her mind. That morning, the sun was shining bright. Jake's truck gleamed a little in the light, even with its rust spots. He turned the key and the engine rumbled again. It wasn't crazy loud, but it was enough to make Linda's head snap up. She marched off her porch, her clipboard flapping in the breeze. Her shoes clicked louder than ever as she stormed across the street. Jake didn't look up. He kept working like he didn't even notice her coming. But he did. Oh, he noticed everything. Linda stopped right at the edge of his driveway. "Jake Miller," she shouted. Her voice was sharp, like a teacher scolding a kid. "What do you think you're doing? That truck is too loud. It's against the rules." Jake wiped his hands on his rag and glanced at her. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her with calm eyes. That made Linda even madder. She hated when people didn't jump when she yelled. "I've told you before," she went on, waving her clipboard. "This neighborhood is quiet. We don't need your noise and your smoke messing it up." Jake shrugged. "It's just a truck, Linda," he said. His voice was soft, not angry, but Linda didn't care. She stepped closer, pointing a finger at him. "You're a problem, Jake, a big problem. I'm going to fix this once and for all." Then she turned and stomped away, her shoes clicking all the way back to her house. Jake watched her go. He didn't yell back. He didn't even frown. He just pulled his baseball cap a little lower over his eyes and went back to his truck. If you looked close, you might have seen a tiny smile on his face. Why wasn't he mad? Why didn't he care about Linda's threats? That's because Jake wasn't afraid of her. He had something up his sleeve, something Linda would never guess. The neighbors peeked out their windows. They saw Linda yelling and Jake staying quiet. "Poor Jake," some of them said. "Linda's gonna make his life hard." Others shook their heads. "He should just follow the rules." But none of them knew the truth. Jake wasn't worried about Linda or her clipboard. He wasn't even worried about her rules. He was there for a reason, a secret reason. Under that greasy cap, Jake was hiding something big. Linda thought he was just a guy who didn't belong. She thought she could scare him away with her mean words and her HOA power. But she was wrong. Jake wasn't some noisy kid. He wasn't even just a regular neighbor. He was someone special, someone with a plan. What was it? Why was he so calm when Linda was so mad? You're gonna love this, because Jake's secret was about to change everything in Maple Grove. The sun kept shining, the birds kept singing, and Jake kept working on his truck. Linda sat in her house plotting her next move. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought she was the boss, but she didn't know Jake was watching her too. He wasn't just fixing a truck. He was waiting for the right moment to show who he really was. What do you think his secret could be? Why was he so sure Linda couldn't stop him? Stick around, because this story's just getting started. Linda Harper didn't like Jake Miller one bit. From the very first day he moved into Maple Grove, she had her eyes on him, and not in a nice way. She'd stand by her perfect white fence, staring at him like he was a big problem she needed to fix. "That truck's an eyesore," she'd yell, her voice loud and sharp, like a whistle blowing in the wind. She was talking about Jake's old pickup truck, the one he kept in his driveway. It was rusty and loud, and Linda hated it. And that exhaust. She'd shout, pointing at the smoke that puffed out when Jake started the engine. "It's a health hazard. You're breaking every rule in the book." Jake didn't say much back. He'd just nod his head nice and slow and keep working. His hands stayed steady on his wrench, turning it this way and that, fixing his truck like nothing was wrong. He didn't argue, he didn't yell, he didn't even look mad. That made Linda's face turn red. She wasn't used to people ignoring her. She was the HOA president, after all, the big boss of the neighborhood. When she said something, she expected people to listen. But Jake, he just kept doing his thing, like her words were nothing but wind blowing by. That only made Linda madder. She'd huff and puff, her arms crossed tight over her clipboard. "I'll teach him a lesson," she'd mutter under her breath as she stormed off. Her shoes clicked hard on the pavement, loud enough for everyone to hear. She'd go back to her house, slamming the door behind her, already thinking up ways to make Jake stop. She wanted him gone, or at least quiet. To her, he was a noisy kid who didn't belong in her perfect little world. Neighbors saw it all. They'd peek out their windows, hiding behind curtains, watching Linda yell and Jake stay calm. "He's too quiet," they'd whisper to each other. "He doesn't talk much. What's he up to?" Some of them shook their heads, thinking Jake should just listen to Linda. "She's the boss," they'd say. "Why doesn't he follow the rules?" Others felt bad for him. "Poor Jake," they'd mumble. "Linda's gonna make his life tough." But none of them really knew Jake. They didn't know why he was there or what he was thinking. They just saw a guy with a loud truck and a lady who wouldn't leave him alone. Linda kept at it, day after day. She'd march over to Jake's driveway whenever she heard that engine rumble. "You're ruining this neighborhood," she'd snap, waving her clipboard like it was a magic wand. She had a list of rules written on it, rules about noise, rules about trucks, rules about everything. To her, Jake was breaking them all. "I've warned you," she'd say, her voice getting louder each time. "You can't keep doing this." But Jake didn't fight back. He'd look at her with those calm eyes, wipe his hands on his greasy rag, and go right back to work. It was like he didn't hear her or didn't care. That drove Linda crazy. She wasn't used to losing. She'd been running Maple Grove for years, telling everyone what to do. If someone's grass was too tall, she'd knock on their door. If a kid left a bike in the yard, she'd write a note. She liked things neat and quiet, and Jake was the opposite of that. His truck growled, his clothes were messy, and worst of all, he didn't bow down to her like everyone else did. "Who does he think he is?" she'd grumble, packing her porch. She was sure she could scare him into leaving. She just needed to push harder. But here's the thing, Jake wasn't scared of her, not one bit. Linda thought she had all the power with her clipboard and her rules, but Jake didn't flinch. When she yelled, he stayed cool. When she threatened him, he didn't blink. Why was that? Why didn't he care about her mean words or her angry glares? There was something about Jake that Linda didn't see, something big. She thought he was just a guy who didn't fit in, but she was wrong. Jake had a reason for being so calm, and it wasn't because he was weak. The neighbors kept watching. They'd see Linda stomp over to Jake's house, her face all twisted up with anger. They'd hear her shout about the truck and the smoke. Then they'd see Jake standing there by his driveway, not saying much. "He's strange," they'd whisper. "Why doesn't he get mad?" Some of them started to wonder if Jake was hiding something. "He's too quiet," they'd say again. "Maybe he's up to no good." But they didn't know the half of it. Jake wasn't scared of Linda or her rules because he had something she didn't expect. Linda didn't know it yet, but Jake was ready for her. Every time she yelled, he listened. Every time she walked away, he watched. He wasn't just fixing his truck for fun. He was waiting for the right time to show her she wasn't as smart as she thought. Why do you think he stayed so calm? What could make a guy like Jake ignore someone as loud and bossy as Linda? It's because he knew something she didn't, something that would turn this whole fight upside down. The tension in Maple Grove was growing. Linda kept pushing and Jake kept staying quiet. The neighbors kept whispering, wondering what would happen next. Would Linda win? Would Jake give up? Or was there more to this story than anyone could guess? One thing was clear, Linda had it out for Jake from day one, but she didn't know who she was really messing with. What do you think was making Jake so brave? Stick around, because this is about to get good. Weeks went by in Maple Grove, and things didn't get any better between Linda and Jake. If anything, they got worse, way worse. Linda's complaints grew louder every day. She wasn't just mad anymore, she was furious. She'd march over to Jake's little house, her shoes clicking fast on the pavement. Bang, 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 she'd pound on his door with her fist, hard enough to make the windows shake. In her other hand, she held her HOA handbook, waving it around like it was a sword or a magic wand. That book was full of her rules, and she treated it like the most important thing in the world. "I'm calling the city next time," she'd yell through the door. Her voice was loud and scratchy, like a crow shouting at the sky. "You can't keep breaking my rules, Jake Miller. This truck has to go." She'd point at his old pickup truck sitting there in the driveway with its rusty spots and noisy engine. To her, it was the worst thing in the neighborhood. She wanted it gone, and she wanted Jake to listen to her. But Jake, he didn't budge. He'd open the door just a crack, peek out at her, and give her a tiny smile. It wasn't a big grin, just a small, quiet one. But oh boy, did that smile make Linda crazy. That little smile drove her nuts. She'd stomp her foot and huff, her face turning redder than a tomato. "What's so funny?" she'd snap. "You think this is a game?" But Jake never answered her questions. He'd just nod a little, shut the door, and go back to whatever he was doing. Linda couldn't stand it. She wasn't used to people ignoring her threats. She was the HOA boss. People were supposed to jump when she said jump. But Jake didn't jump. He didn't even flinch. And that made her want to scream even louder. The neighbors kept watching all this from their houses. They'd peek out from behind their curtains, whispering to each other. "Linda's really mad now," they'd say. "Jake, in big trouble." Some of them thought Linda was right. Maybe the truck was too loud. Others just liked the drama. "What's he gonna do?" they'd wonder. "She's not gonna stop." But Jake didn't seem worried. He'd go out to his driveway every day, tinkering with that truck like nothing was wrong. The engine would rumble and a little smoke would puff out. And every time, Linda would lose her mind all over again. Then one day, something big happened. It was a sunny afternoon and Jake was out by his truck just like always. He turned the key and the engine roared to life. It was louder than usual and a big curl of gray smoke floated up into the air. Linda was on her porch sipping tea when she heard it. Her head snapped up and her eyes got wide. She dropped her teacup, crash, and it broke into pieces on the floor. "That's it," she screeched, her voice so high it could have cracked glass. I've had enough of you, Jake Miller. She grabbed her phone from her pocket and held it up like she was about to win a war. I'm calling 911, she shouted loud enough for the whole street to hear. This is an emergency. That truck is a danger to everyone. She started dialing, her fingers shaking with anger. Jake didn't move. He just leaned against his truck, his arms crossed, watching her. That same little smile was on his face, like he knew something she didn't. Linda glared at him as she pressed the phone to her ear. You're done, Jake, she said. The cops are coming for you. But then something weird happened. Jake's eyes flicked away from Linda for just a second. He looked down the street and there it was, a police cruiser rolling up slow and steady. Its lights weren't flashing and its siren wasn't on, but it was definitely a cop car. It was already there, pulling closer to Jake's house. Linda didn't see it at first. She was too busy yelling into her phone. Yes, hello 911, she said. I need help right now. There's a man with a dangerous truck. She stopped talking when she heard the car door open. She turned her head and her mouth dropped open. The police were already here. How? She hadn't even finished her call. Jake stayed where he was, leaning on his truck, watching it all. The neighbors poked their heads out again, eyes big with surprise. Wait a minute, they whispered. Why are the cops here so fast? Did Linda call them before? Something funny was going on, and nobody knew what it was except maybe Jake. Linda blinked at the cruiser, her phone still in her hand. What's this? She muttered. She thought the cops were there because of her call, but that didn't make sense. They'd shown up too quick. Jake's little smile got a tiny bit bigger, but he didn't say a word. He just stood there, cool as a cucumber, while Linda's face went from red to white. She didn't know what to think. Was this about the truck, or was something else happening? The air felt thick with questions, and everyone could feel it. The police cruiser stopped right in front of Jake's driveway. Two officers stepped out, their boots hitting the ground with a thud. Linda stared at them, her phone slipping a little in her sweaty hand. She thought they were coming for Jake. After all, she'd been complaining about him for weeks. But Jake didn't look scared. He didn't even move. He just watched, calm and steady, like he'd been waiting for this all along. Why wasn't he nervous? What was going on? The neighbors leaned closer to their windows. What's happening? They whispered. Did Linda finally win? But something told them this wasn't what it seemed. Jake's eyes stayed on the cops, and that little smile never left his face. Linda's big plan to get him in trouble was starting to feel shaky. The cops were here, sure, but why? Was it really about the truck? Or was there something bigger going on, something Linda didn't see coming? What do you think? Jake knew that she did. This story about to get wild, so don't go anywhere. Linda Harper stood in Jake's driveway, her phone pressed tight to her ear. She was smirking, her eyes locked on Jake like she'd just won a big prize. The police cruiser had rolled up and parked right in front of Jake's house, its tires crunching on the pavement. Linda was sure this was her moment. See, she crowed, her voice loud and smug. They're here for you, Jake Miller. I told you I'd fix this. She thought the cops had come to drag Jake away because of his loud truck and smoky exhaust. She'd been complaining about him for weeks, and now she felt like the queen of Maple Grove. Jake just stood there, leaning against his old pickup truck. He didn't say a word. His arms were crossed, and his face was calm, too calm. Linda didn't notice that part. She was too busy gloating. She waved her phone around like it was proof she was right. You're in big trouble now, she said, her smirk stretching wider. The neighbors were watching from their windows, their noses pressed against the glass. They'd heard Linda's yells, and they'd seen the cop car pull up. Linda finally got him. they whispered. Jake, done for. But then something happened, something nobody expected. The cruiser's doors opened and two police officers stepped out. Their boots hit the ground with a loud thud and their faces were serious. Linda kept smirking, waiting for them to march over to Jake and tell him off. But the cops didn't even glance at Jake. They turned and walked straight toward her. Their steps were slow but steady, like they knew exactly where they were going. Linda's smirk started to fade. Her eyes got wide, and her hand with the phone dropped a little. Linda Harper, one of the officers asked. His voice was strong and firm, like he wasn't asking for fun. Linda blinked fast, like she wasn't sure she'd heard him right. Yes, she stammered. Her voice wasn't loud anymore. It was small and shaky, like a kid caught sneaking candy. The other officer pulled out a clipboard, not like Linda's fancy HOA one, but a plain one with papers clipped to it. He looked at the papers, then back at Linda. "We've got a warrant for your arrest," he said. His words were clear and heavy, like stones dropping into a pond. Linda's jaw fell open so wide it nearly hit the ground. "Arrest," she squeaked. "For me, that's a mistake." She shook her head fast, her hands waving in the air. The neighbors gasped, their whispers getting louder. "What's going on?" they said to each other. "Linda's in trouble." Jake hadn't moved. He was still leaning on his truck, but now a big grin spread across his face. It wasn't that tiny, quiet smile anymore. This was a real one, bright and bold. The officer with the clipboard kept talking. "Tax fraud and illegal HOA fees," he said, reading from his papers. "You've been scamming this neighborhood for years, Ms. Harper, taking money that wasn't yours." Linda's face went pale, like all the color drained out of it. "No," she cried, "that's not true. I didn't do anything." But the officers didn't look like they believed her. They stepped closer, and one of them pulled out a pair of shiny silver handcuffs. The neighbors were buzzing now, their voices spilling out from every house. "Scamming," they said. Linda was stealing. They couldn't believe it. Linda was the HOA boss, the one who made all the rules. She was supposed to keep things fair, not cheat people. But the cops weren't done. "We've got proof," the first officer said. "Letters, bank records, everything. You've been pocketing HOA money for parks, sidewalks, all of it." Linda's legs wobbled like they might give out. She looked around, hoping someone would help her. But the neighbors just stared, their eyes big with shock. Nobody stepped up to save her. She turned back to Jake, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "This is your fault," she shouted, pointing a shaky finger at him. "You did this somehow." But Jake just shook his head, still grinning. He reached up to his greasy baseball cap, the one he always wore, and pulled it off slow, like he was in no hurry. And that's when it happened, the biggest surprise of all. Jake turned the cap around, and there, pinned to the inside, was a shiny gold badge. It gleamed in the sunlight, catching everyone's eye. "Oh, and by the way," Jake said, his voice calm but strong, "I'm Officer Jake Miller, undercover, been watching you for months." Boom, just like that, the whole street went quiet. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Linda's eyes got so big they looked like they might pop out. The neighbors gasped so loud it sounded like a big gust of wind. "Undercover," Linda whispered, her voice barely there. She took a step back, almost tripping over her own feet. Jake nodded. "Yup," he said. "I moved here to catch you, Linda. That truck, the noise, all part of the plan to keep you distracted." He tapped the badge with his finger. I've been working with the police the whole time, gathering proof of what you did. The officers nodded, like they'd known Jake's secret all along. Linda's face twisted up. "No," she yelled, "you can't do this. I'm in charge here." But the cops weren't listening. One of them took her arm, gentle but firm. "Let's go, Ms. Harper," he said. The handcuffs clicked as they closed around her wrists. Linda kept shaking her head, muttering, "This isn't happening." But it was happening right there in front of everyone. The neighbors couldn't stop talking now. "Jake's a cop," they said. "He was undercover." They looked at him like they were seeing him for the first time. The guy they thought was just a noisy nobody was really a hero. Jake put his cap back on, but not before giving the crowd a little wink. That made them cheer loud and happy. Linda heard it as the cops led her to the cruiser. Her head hung low, and her clipboard fell to the ground with a sad little thud. What do you think Linda was thinking right then? She'd been so sure she had Jake all figured out. She thought he was just a guy with a loud truck, someone she could boss around. But Jake had played her like a fiddle. He'd been one step ahead the whole time, watching her every move. How's that for a twist? This wasn't just about a truck, it was about justice, and Jake made sure it happened. Stick around, because there's more to this story. Linda Harper's face turned as red as a ripe tomato. She stood there in Jake's driveway, her hands stuck behind her back as the police snapped cold, shiny handcuffs around her wrists. Click, click, they locked tight, and she couldn't move her arms. "This is a mistake," she wailed, her voice loud and whiny like a kid who dropped their ice cream. She shook her head back and forth, her eyes darting around, looking for someone to help. But nobody stepped up. The two officers held her arms, calm and steady, like they'd done this 100 times before. Linda kept yelling, "Let me go, you've got the wrong person." But the cops didn't listen. They knew they had the right person, Linda Harper, the HOA boss who wasn't so bossy anymore. The neighbors couldn't believe their eyes. They peeked out from their houses, some standing on porches, others pressing their faces to windows. They whispered to each other, pointing at Linda as she squirmed. "What's happening?" they said. "Linda's getting arrested." Then the truth came out, and it hit them like a big splash of cold water. Turns out, Linda had been pocketing HOA money, thousands and thousands of dollars. That money was supposed to fix things in Maple Grove, like the bumpy sidewalks and the old swings at the park. But Linda didn't use it for that. She kept it for herself, sneaking it into her own pockets like a sneaky squirrel hiding nuts. Jake Miller stood by his truck watching it all. His arms were crossed and a big grin sat on his face. He'd tricked everyone, especially Linda. He wasn't just some noisy guy with a rusty truck. He was Officer Jake Miller, an undercover cop sent to catch her. For months, he'd lived in that little house, pretending to be a quiet troublemaker. He revved his truck's engine loud on purpose, letting the smoke puff into the air. Why? To keep Linda's eyes on him. She was so busy yelling about the truck that she never guessed he was watching her every move. Jake had been smart, super smart. He'd played her like a game, and now he'd won. The cops started walking Linda to the cruiser. Her shoes dragged on the ground, and she kept shouting, "This isn't fair, I didn't do anything wrong." But everyone knew she was lying. The officers had proof, papers and bank stuff that showed all the money she'd taken. She couldn't talk her way out of this one. The cruiser's back door opened with a creak and they helped her inside. Linda's red face pressed against the window as the car started up. She looked out at Jake, her eyes full of shock and anger. She couldn't believe it. Her big plan to get rid of him had blown up in her face. Jake raised his hand and waved to the crowd. "Street's safe now," he said, his voice loud and clear. The neighbors stared at him, their mouths hanging open. Then one by one they started to clap. Clap, clap, clap. It got louder and louder until the whole street was cheering. Kids ran out of their houses, jumping up and down. Old folks smiled from their porches. Even the dogs barked like they were happy too. The same people who'd ignored Jake before, who'd whispered he didn't fit in, were now shouting his name. Jake. Jake, they yelled. He wasn't just some guy anymore. He was a hero, the hero nobody saw coming. The cruiser pulled away, its engine humming as it rolled down the street. Linda's face disappeared behind the glass and the neighbors watched her go. She'd been the queen of Maple Grove, strutting around with her clipboard, telling everyone what to do. If your grass was too long, she'd bang on your door. If your dog barked, she'd leave a mean note. She'd made rules for everything, and she'd made sure everyone followed them, everyone except Jake. Now her reign was over. She wasn't the boss anymore. She was just a lady in handcuffs, heading to jail. Jake turned back to his truck and gave it a little pat like it was his buddy. That truck had been part of his trick. He'd made it loud and smoky to keep Linda mad so she wouldn't notice him snooping. All those weeks she'd yelled at him, he'd been collecting clues, letters, receipts, sneaky phone calls Linda thought nobody heard. He'd worked with the police the whole time, quiet as a mouse, until the day was right. And today was that day. Linda's cheating game was done, and Jake had made sure of it. The neighbors started walking over to Jake. "You're a cop?" one lady asked, her eyes big. Jake nodded. "Yup," he said, "been here to stop Linda." A little boy tugged on his mom's shirt. "He's a hero," the boy said, pointing at Jake. That made Jake laugh. "Just doing my job," he said, but to them it was more than that. They'd lived under Linda's rules for years, scared to mess up. Now they were free, and it was all because of Jake. The sun was still shining bright over Maple Grove. The birds chirped again and the air felt lighter, like a big storm had passed. Linda's perfect white fence didn't look so perfect anymore. It was just a fence, nothing special. Her clipboard lay in the dirt where she'd dropped it, forgot. The neighborhood wasn't hers to control now. It belonged to the people again, the kids who wanted to play, the folks who wanted to relax, and Jake had given it back to them. How do you think Linda felt when the truth hit her? She'd been so sure she was smarter than Jake. She'd thought he was just a noisy guy she could push around, but he'd turned the tables on her. Inside that cruiser, bouncing down the road, she must have felt mad, scared, and maybe even silly. All her yelling, all her threats, they'd been for nothing. Jake had been the real boss all along, and she never saw it coming. What do you think was going through her head as the car drove away? She'd lost everything, her power, her money, her big HOA throne. Jake looked at the crowd one more time, then tipped his cap. "See you around," he said, climbing into his truck. The engine growled to life, but this time nobody minded the noise. They waved as he drove off, the hero who'd saved Maple Grove. Linda was gone and justice was served, nice and simple, just the way it should be. What's your favorite part of this ending? Let me know. Jake Miller climbed into his old pickup truck that night. The sun had gone down and the sky over Maple Grove was dark, dotted with little twinkling stars. He turned the key and the engine rumbled loud one last time, like a big goodbye growl. The neighbors stood on their porches and lawns watching him. They waved as he pulled out of his driveway, his truck's headlights cutting through the night. Jake wasn't staying. He had another case to work on somewhere new. He'd finished his job here, and now it was time to go. The street got quiet again as his truck disappeared around the corner, off to help someone else. Linda Harper thought she was the big boss of everything. She strutted around with her clipboard, telling people what to do. She'd yell at kids for playing too loud, glare at dogs for barking, and shake her fist at Jake for his noisy truck. She thought she could push everyone around, make them scared of her rules. To her, Jake was just a quiet guy with a loud exhaust, a nobody she could boss and bully. She never guessed he was the one who'd bring her down. She didn't see it coming, not even a little bit. Linda judged him by his greasy cap and rusty truck, but she missed the real Jake, the smart, brave cop hiding right in front of her. That's the funny thing about people. Sometimes the ones you overlook are the ones with the real power. Linda looked at Jake and saw a troublemaker. She didn't think he could do anything big, but Jake had more strength than she ever dreamed. He stayed quiet, watched her, and waited. He didn't need to yell or fight. He just used his brain and his badge. And in the end, he won. Linda's mean words and sneaky tricks didn't stand a chance against him. The guy she ignored turned out to be the hero who saved the day. So here's something to think about. Next time you see someone, don't judge them too fast. You might think you know who they are, but you could be wrong. That quiet kid in class, maybe they're super smart. That person who doesn't talk much, they might be brave in ways you can't see. You never know who's really in charge until the truth comes out. Linda learned that the hard way. She thought she had all the power, but Jake showed her she didn't. He showed everyone that being loud and bossy doesn't make you strong. Being smart and good does. Maple Grove was different now. The air felt cleaner without Linda's rules hanging over it. Kids laughed louder, dogs ran freer, and folks smiled more. Jake had given them back their neighborhood. He didn't stay to hear all the thank yous. He didn't need to. He just climbed into his truck and drove off, ready for his next adventure. But the people there wouldn't forget him. They tell this story for a long time, about the quiet guy with the loud truck who turned out to be a hero. What's your favorite part of this story? Was it when Jake showed his badge and Linda's jaw dropped? Or maybe when the neighbors cheered as the cops took her away? Maybe you liked how Jake stayed calm the whole time, even when Linda was yelling her head off. Whatever it is, let me know below. This story's all about surprises, about how things aren't always what they seem. It's about how the little guy can win, even when the big boss thinks they've got it all locked up. Think about your own life for a second. Have you ever met someone who turned out to be more than you thought? Maybe a friend who's quiet but super strong inside, or someone who helped you when you didn't expect it. That's what Jake's story teaches us. Don't count people out just because they don't shout or show off. The real heroes don't always look like heroes at first. They're the ones who wait, watch, and do what's right when the time comes. So next time you're quick to judge, stop and think. Take a second look. You might be standing next to someone amazing, someone who's got power you can't see yet. Jake proved that in Maple Grove, and it's a lesson worth keeping. Linda's gone, Jake's a legend, and the neighborhood's free. That's a pretty cool ending, don't you think? Tell me what you think. I'd love to hear it.